Good morning, my friends. It's Friday morning, and we are here on the back porch office. We're going to read from Acts 17:22 through the end of the chapter through 34, I think yes, through 34. Paul's sermon to the Greeks in the Areopagus, which is a outdoor courtyard sort of place in the middle of Athens. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by humans, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of all the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God, and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others, others said, "We will hear again from you about this." So Paul went out from their midst. But some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysus the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So here we see Paul taking a different tack. He doesn't need to start off the way that he would if he were speaking with Jewish people, with talking about the Old Testament. He's talking to Greek philosophers who don't know anything about the Old Testament and don't care about the Old Testament. So he says, well, you worship all these gods, and you even have a statue to the unknown God in case you missed one. Well, I'm here to tell you about that unknown God. He created the world, and he created all of us, and he created everything. And then Paul quotes a couple of their poets. He created everything, and we live in him. In him we live and move and have our being, and we're his offspring. These are citations or quotes of a sort from various Greek poets, and we're not really sure exactly which ones, but there are several candidates for that. And so Paul wants to show them he's not just some ignorant Jewish preacher from the hinterlands. He's cultured and educated as they are, and he can throw in quotes by their poets, and so that helps. And he's going along, and they're probably nodding and thinking, this is interesting, this is good. Until he says, and of course, then he rose from the dead. And at that point, a lot of them go, really? Resurrection from the dead? Thank you. But a few do believe and say, yeah, we want to hear more about this. And then right at the end, it says that one of the ones who believed was Dionysus. Now, Dionysus, the Areopagite, is the guy who was there listening to Paul. And his subsequent career is very interesting because he's been the victim of a great deal of misinformation. He's remembered as the first bishop of Athens, and remembered well by the churches that keep track of these things. First bishop of Athens, but several centuries later, maybe around the year 500, no one's quite sure, someone somewhere wrote several books, and they're Neoplatonic. They're books that are sort of on the edge of what we would call Orthodox Christianity and theology, but they were pretty influential in the Middle Ages when there weren't that many books, and whoever wrote these attributed them to Dionysus, this guy from Athens. And so that gave them an aura of respectability, and they were treasured by some folks in the Middle Ages for about 1,000 years. And then around the year 1400, somebody or other, some Italian, basically proved, no, these were not written by Dionysus. These are written 400 years later by some other guy, and we don't know who. And he proved conclusively that they depended on the work of this one Neoplatonic philosopher, Proclus. And so, since that time, those works have been known as the works of Pseudo Dionysus, the Areopagite. So you have Dionysus and you have Pseudo Dionysus, who's a completely different person who lived 400 years later and we know nothing about. So poor Dionysus gets the credit for all this other work that he didn't do. Add to that, in the year, I think around before 800, somewhere in the early Middle Ages, there was a great deal of confusion in Paris, France, about Dionysus and Saint Denis, who was the patron saint of Paris and whose cathedral is where they buried almost all of the French kings. Well, there was a great deal of confusion early on about whether that guy and Dionysus were the same guy. And they aren't, but that's what some people taught, and so you have that confusion. So poor Dionysus has been mischaracterized for centuries, but he's just a guy that heard Paul, was converted, and becomes a leader in the church in Athens. And for that, at least, we should remember him. Paul's preaching then in Athens is different from the rest of his presentations, which means that he changes his sermon style based on the context. He has a core message that's always the same, but the context determines the way that he presents that core and the ethical things that he derives from that core. And that's important for us to remember. Well, that's enough for a Friday morning. I hope your head's not exploding. And you can look all these things up. What I'm telling you is true. And I hope that you do that. And I hope that you have a great day. So, see you tomorrow.